Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we are going to be talking about Thomas Paine's vision and wisdom from the 1700s and how it applies to the environment today with my guest, Ian Ruskin. He is an actor, a playwright, and director of Ruskin Productions and director of the Harry Bridges Project. He has won the History Award Medal from the Daughters of the American Revolution and is a member of the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, or BAFTA. He also has been executive producer, writer, and actor in the film To Begin the World Over Again and also The Life of Thomas Paine. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Most people may recall the name Thomas Paine because he wrote a very famous book that was very influential in the American Revolutionary era called Common Sense. And you do a fantastic, exciting one-man play about this important person. Before we start talking about how his ideas about democracy, equality, prejudice, discrimination, deism, etc. applies to our Earth today and our environment and how we are protecting it, let's explain who Thomas Paine really was.
Right. Well, I would say he was personally one of the most misunderstood men in history. He arrived in Philadelphia from England when he was 37. Within a year had written Common Sense, as you mentioned, which not only sparked the American Revolution, literally, but is still regarded as the biggest selling publication in history for the number of people in the population.
The publication, of course, it had tens of thousands.
Probably over 100,000 copies were printed and sold in the colonies, partly because he gave up all publishing rights so that people could print their own cheap copies. And basically everyone either bought it and read it, or it was read aloud to people who were illiterate, so everyone knew it, and it literally sparked the American Revolution. And that's just the beginning, because then, a little later, he was in France, and he probably doing some short readings from some of these. He wrote Rights of Man in 2 parts, which was a defense of and an explanation of the French Revolution. And he then wrote Age of Reason, which got him into a lot of trouble, but was really about the idea of living from your reason, not from dogma and myth and fear, but from your reason. These books had an enormous impact on the way the Western world developed in the late 18th and early 19th centuries.
If he were living today, would he also be writing about the rights of other species on this planet, about the right to a clean environment?
I think absolutely. He obviously in the 1760s, 70s, 80s, whenever, the concept of environment, at least to Western men and women, didn't really exist, I think, because there was, when people think of the colonies, there was so much that was unspoiled, partly because, of course, Native Americans did think about the environment. But it was said a squirrel could get on a tree in Massachusetts and get off at the Mississippi. America was a vast forest. It didn't, for the colonists, the people from England and Germany and everywhere else that came to colonies, it wasn't really an issue then. Now, he would absolutely have a focus on the earth, on looking after the planet. A lot of that, I think, comes from his deism, which maybe we'll get to in a minute. But definitely, he'd have a lot to say about what's going on with climate change and man's effect on the planet.
What do you think Paine would say about taking care of the earth and protecting the environment?
Well, I think one thing he would say immediately is that if you want to protect the environment, you have to empower people. You have to give people a sense that the environment is theirs and they can make a difference. And all his works, all his writings were really about empowering people.
There are so many philosophers, writers, in the past who have written, as Thomas Paine has, ideas that are relevant still today and particularly useful in our concept of what actions are needed to protect our environment. What are some of the other thoughts, visions, writings, concepts that you believe are relevant today that have been presented in the past that we should pay more attention to?
That's a big question. Well, the first thought is about Native Americans. There's a whole indigenous people, if that's the right word, seem to have always protected the environment far more than the people creating empires. There are so many philosophers out of history. We all know the idea of protecting the world for the next 7 generations, which is a stunning concept. I would say start there. Start with the wisdom of people. The trouble is, see, those people were not people who had any desire to take power as we understand it. Unfortunately, it's the people who take the power and conquer that tend to be the people who have the impact on the environment, on the world, on history. So that's, I think, the constant battle. The other thing is just remembering. There's a wonderful quote from Milan Kundera, who recently died. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. So we have to remember. Even today, right now, there are fires in Hawaii. Well, those fires will be put out, but we have to remember them. You have to remember that July was the hottest month in the history of recorded temperatures. Even if August is cooler, it's about don't let these things wander from our minds, because we need to hold them. We need to have them inspire us to act, but we need to remember.
In fact, a lot of the founding fathers in the United States are considered deists. So
Yes.
Explain what that word and concept really is.
And you're right, most of the founding fathers were deists. They were not Christians, they were deists. Now, deism basically believes that there is a God or a power or a unifying force that created the earth. Paine also had quite a few things to say about the universe and other planets. But if we just stay with this planet, that God created the earth. Having created it, he then basically left. He said, it's yours to us, and left. So that deists believe if you want to communicate with God, if you want to feel in the presence of God, you do not go to a building built by men to listen to some man in robes reading from some book telling you about God. You walk in the woods. That God is nature. That one of the concepts of the Enlightenment, which was part of what Paine was writing about and was involved in, that nature and God are the same thing.
There are other spiritual religious beliefs that believe the same thing, like pantheism.
Yes, yes. Oh, yeah, deism isn't the only one. It was the one that was, I think, the most active at the time of the founding of America. And it's still active. There are still deists today. But the fact that that's how deists viewed the earth, I think would absolutely mean that deists today, they would want to protect the earth because they would see the earth as being God's work, which in theory, all religions you would think would consider, but some don't seem to very much. But yes, they would be, I'm sure, in the forefront of any environmental movements.
Because he was actively advocating for democratic societies. Mm-hmm. When most of the European world at the time, and probably in Asia and Africa as well, had monarchies and dictators and not a democratic system, it seems to me that the democratic system has really helped our current environmental movement by allowing the people to be engaged in trying to get laws passed that help clean up the air, clean up the land, clean up the water, protect ecosystems and wilderness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. He was very forward-thinking in terms of the right to vote, in terms of the destructive power of war. I mean, he was very supportive of the American Revolution, but then he gradually came to see that war is endless. It's the rich that make money out of war, and the poor who die. He came to see that very clearly. He was very much about empowering what we would call the common man, if you like, not only voting, but in terms of education. He was an early advocate of all children having at least certain amount of education, whether they were rich or poor. He said that God gave the earth to all men and women as well as men. And therefore, anyone who had these huge estates in England, say, for example, or in America, the estates, the country estates, land was like the modern corporation today. He had a wonderful idea that he said, what a owner of an estate produces from the land is his, but the land itself is not. Therefore, he has to pay a rent for the land to the community to kind of make up for the fact that most people don't have any land. And that money would be taken and given to every man and woman equally at age 21 so they could make a start in life. It was very much about empowering all people, not keeping the power with the kings and queens and bishops that ran the world, the Western world at that time. And obviously, I think if people have power, they are more likely to understand the importance of the world because they have a stake in it.
And the concept of land ownership is so important in this day and age when so many people, again, do not own land. And while we have public land set aside, run by the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Agriculture, the Forest Service, the Interior Departments, National Park Service, and then, of course, state, local, county parks and public lands. Many of these public lands are being given away practically free or with minimal amounts of money due to corporations for ranching, for mining. And so it seems to me that his ideas of a couple of hundred years ago are still relevant today in terms of keeping the lands public for the public.
Yes. Yes. The other thing I want to say about this, there's a wonderful book called The Dawn of Everything. It's a big title. A New History of Humanity. It's a big, thick book. These two men who have kind of rewritten the history of the development of the human race. It's a very big book with big ideas. But one of the things I didn't realize was that in the 17th and 18th centuries, a lot of Native Americans went to Europe. A lot of them learned to speak English, and they went to Europe, and they were like philosophers. And part of this whole idea of nature's God came from them. I mean, they talked, they debated, they gave lectures in the courts of Europe and had a real impact on the development of ideas of the Enlightenment. They also had a lot to say about the corruption of money and power and things like that. It's really interesting. I never knew this till I read this book. Well, Paine felt very strong connections to various tribes, particularly the Iroquois. He said, "They are my brothers." And he said this at a time when we have to remember in the Declaration of Independence, they are called merciless savages. That's in the Declaration. Whereas Paine considered them to be brothers. And obviously, Native Americans looked after the environment, or they had an understanding of the importance of it. That's just another level to this.
He definitely understood the concept of equality, that human beings are all human beings. Before we take our break, could you share just a little bit of your character of Thomas Paine in your one-act performance?
Sure. I'll give you a little passage which is about voting rights. Now, when I read from his works, it's very clear that I am reading his works. What I'm going to give you now has little bits of his words, and also it has mine. My play obviously is a mixture of his words and mine, hopefully spoken in his spirit. So here's a little bit about voting. John Adams wrote that the United States should be governed by a few of the most wise and good, the rich and well-born and able. Hamilton said the rich and well-born should have a distinct permanent place in government to check the imprudence of democracy. Yet Adams was the son of a farmer, Hamilton an illegitimate orphan raised in abject poverty, not exactly well-born, either of them. Beware of men who see their own rise to success as a sign of their own superiority. And having achieved power, how could the rich and well-born check the imprudence of democracy? By restricting the right to vote, which they did. There was a famous case of a man who fell on hard times and had to sell his ass, thereby losing enough of his assets as to also lose his right to vote. Well, Ben posed the question, wherein lies the vote? In the man or in the ass? I said that all men should vote. That's just a little bit of Paine.
And that is from which play?
This is from To Begin the World Over Again, The Life of Thomas Paine.
And I look forward to hearing more about Thomas Paine with actor-playwright Ian Ruskin when we return in a moment.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Ian Ruskin, who has a one-man play about Thomas Paine, his vision and wisdom. You are very committed to presenting the important concepts that Paine wrote about in Common Sense and his other works. What are some of the other major ideas that he had that we can apply today to protecting our environment? Because you mentioned voting rights, and of course it's critical now that everybody has voting rights in order to vote for politicians who care about the environment and will take some appropriate action.
Yes. Well, I'm going to read you a very short passage about war. War is the common harvest of all those who participate in the division and expenditure of public money. In despotic governments, wars are the effect of pride. But in those governments in which they become the means of taxation, they require a permanent habitualness. Taxes are not raised to carry on wars, but rather wars are raised to carry on taxes. War is the art of conquering at home. I think all that's very true, and war is another thing that helps to destroy the environment.
Over a decade ago, I spoke about war as being the ultimate pollution. I recall my involvement in the environmental movement came when I was protesting the Vietnam War and the destruction with the napalm, and how generations in Vietnam are still suffering from that. And now we know that people are still suffering from the effects of the atomic bomb, both here in the United States and in Japan and other places. And we have the threat of nuclear war. We see the destruction of war in the Ukraine. War is a major environmental problem.
Yes, and the thing is that Paine was not a pacifist, because Paine helped start the American Revolution. He was against war because he saw that it was a constant destruction. He saw that it was the rich that started wars and made the money out of wars, including the founding fathers, many of whom produced a lot of them, the bullets, the ammunition for the American Revolution, and that it was the poor who went and fought and were killed, and if they came back, they had nothing when they came back. It's not even that he was a pacifist. Because he was a very practical man in lots of ways, but he saw the obvious destructive force of war on humanity and on the environment. Yes.
I have thoroughly enjoyed hearing and reading and seeing you perform your play about Thomas Paine. It's really moving, and you really get into that character from the past, but it's so relevant today as we are talking about his ideas. But in addition, you care about other historical figures, and you're writing a play that we'll soon see about Nikola Tesla. And he's very famous for his discovery of electricity, although Edison gets the credit.
Well, yes, it was called the War of the Currents because Tesla supported the idea of alternating current, whereas Edison wanted direct current. Well, direct current is now what is in batteries, but everywhere that we have lights and power, it's alternating current. That was one level of Tesla's work, but he had a vision which he never achieved, partly because his labs burnt down, were torn down, were dynamited. He believed it was possible to take power from the air and the earth, electrical power, and send it round the world to anywhere on earth. His vision was to supply free power to the world.
We certainly need that.
He saw the end of the need for any other source of power, and he said for coal, oil, gas. The other thing also, because he had his visions come true, it would have wiped out the copper industry because this would have been wireless electricity. But he also talked about what he called, basically he was talking about the power of the sun, the power, cosmic energy is what he called it, coming from the cosmos. And the biggest engineering project that's ever been in the world is nuclear fusion, which many governments of the world have been working on this for 20 years, and we're getting closer. If we can create nuclear fusion, which is basically the energy of the sun, we won't need any other kind of power at all. It'll provide everything we would ever need, which obviously, if it's not too late, would have an enormous impact on the environment and on climate change. But we're not there yet. They are getting closer.
So his ideas and innovations and inventions would really help solve our current climate change problems, our current pollution problems.
Yes. What's happening with Tesla is we're getting closer to achieving some of his, what were considered his more outlandish ideas. We're getting closer all the time. We're able to do certain things on a very small scale that he said we could do on a large scale. So we're not there yet. But every few weeks I read of another sort of step forward in either wireless transmission or nuclear fusion, many of his ideas. Yes.
He was rather ahead of his time.
Yes, he was. He was way ahead of his time in so many ways. Yeah.
I will certainly look forward to seeing you perform him in your upcoming play. I also want to have you tell me who Harry Bridges is, because you're director of the Harry Bridges Project.
Yes, he was the first man that I wrote a play about. I had played him in a play, and then I decided to write a one-man play. He was a union leader. He was an Australian, came to California, and basically he founded the West Coast Longshore Union, the dock workers who unload the ships. But more than that, starting at, let's say, in the 1930s, he was a really visionary man in that he saw and he fought for things such as not just workers' rights and better pay, but things like a national health care system he wanted, dental care, vision care, real pensions, real social security. Because you have to remember, when people first started talking about Social Security, most politicians said that was communism. And it took Roosevelt and a Great Depression to bring about Social Security. So all those kinds of issues, which again, they weren't directly related to the environment, but they were about giving power to working people, giving working people in America, his focus was Americans mainly, but giving them a decent life, decent pensions.
The concept of a decent life for humans, health, economic security, education, all of these issues are important because, as we find out today around the world, if you want to protect the environment, you have to help the local communities by providing education and health care. And that's the same situation here in the United States. If they're going to care about the environment, they have to feel that they are being cared about.
Yes. It sort of has to be a two-way street. And there was also a level where Bridges believed in international solidarity. So that, two things. The union would send not their officers, but they'd have these delegations of just regular union workers who would go and visit Israel or Cuba or South Africa or Liverpool. And they would meet with other dock workers and other workers to create a feeling of international solidarity. And the ILWU was very, very forward in protesting against apartheid. They refused to load Japanese and German ships at the beginning of the Second World War. They refused to load and unload ships from South Africa because of apartheid. They believed in workers also supporting each other around the world, which again, with the issues, environmental issues, especially today, are a worldwide issue. they're not the issue of one country. He would have been very much at the forefront of that.
You were executive producer, writer, and actor in the film To Begin the World Over Again, The Life of Thomas Paine. Your one-man performances, plays are well worth seeing, exciting, stimulating. Could you go back into character one more time and share something else that Thomas Paine said that would be relevant to us today in protecting our Earth and making this planet a better place to live?
Yeah, I'll read you one more passage. This passage is from Rights of Man, Part 2. When it shall be said in any country in the world, my poor are happy, neither ignorance nor distress is to be found among them. My jails are empty of prisoners, my streets of beggars. The aged are not in want, the taxes are not repressive. The rational world is my friend because I am a friend of happiness. When these things can be said, then may that country boast of its constitution and its government. And again, he's talking about when people have a sense of their own power and when they have a chance to build their own lives, they're going to feel much more connected to their place in the world and their place in the environment.
It must be difficult to decide what letters to read in your play about Paine, but could you share a couple of more writings from Thomas Paine?
So this is from Agrarian Justice. I would say his last major work. It is wrong to say that God made rich and poor. He only made male and female and gave them the earth for their inheritance. So when land is improved through cultivation, it is the value of the improvement only, not the earth itself, that is individual property. Every proprietor of cultivated land, therefore, owes the community a ground rent for the land he holds. This ground rent will finance a national fund to pay every person at age 21 a sum as a compensation in part for the loss of his or her natural inheritance of land, and a sum per year to every person at age 50, and to those blind and lame who cannot provide income themselves for the rest of their lives. And this will not be a charity, but a right, not bounty, but justice.
You are from the United Kingdom, and you're a member of the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, which is the equivalent of our Film Academy here in the United States. What appealed to you about the life and times and writings of Thomas Paine that you felt compelled to share it with us?
Well, what happened was I was performing my first play about Harry Bridges, which is called From Wharf Rats to Lords of the Docks. I was performing that on the East Coast, and in the space of, I think, 3 days, 3 different people came up to me and said, you should do a play about Thomas Paine. And I didn't really know who Thomas Paine was. But because 3 people said it, when I came back home to L.A., I started reading. I read a biography of Thomas Paine, and that was it. And I knew I had my second play, my second man. When you write a one-man play, I think there are 3 things. One is you have to believe, or you have to basically agree with the philosophy of the person, for me, to write a play. The person has to have an up and down life. You write a play about someone who was successful all the way through his life with no problems. That is really boring. Well, Paine, his life was a roller coaster, and that also appealed to me. The fact that he would achieve these great heights like a rock star, and then he would be hated and despised, and he would rise again, and he always believed and was always optimistic and hopeful. That to me was very inspiring. And also, you need to have a fan club of people who believe in Thomas Paine, Nikola Tesla, Harry Bridges, so that you have a start of where you can get some support and interest.
I'm so glad that you discovered Thomas Paine and you have shared his thoughts and writings with us. Thank you so very much for your wonderful plays and performances. Thank you for being my guest.
You're welcome. The film of Paine and also the film of Bridges are on Vimeo.
And they can get more information at your website, ruskinproductions.com.
Yes, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. I have been speaking with Ian Ruskin, who is an actor, playwright, and director of Ruskin Productions. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559 9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.